Hi folks, welcome back. Now, tell me if this sounds familiar. California is on fire, literally and metaphorically. Our state's economy is burning through cash like a brush fire in August, and the same people who lit the match are now lecturing us about arson. We're living in a moment where the Democrat Party, after years of defending open-air drug markets and blaming capitalism for literally everything, even bad weather, is suddenly outraged that there are homeless people flooding our streets. And leading the charge is none other than Gavin Newsom, our governor and everyone's favorite walking bottle of hair gel and hypocrisy, who recently had a full-blown meltdown on live TV asking how other Democrats keep getting reelected while homeless encampments stretch across the state like his presidential donor list. It's the kind of shamelessness that could make a used car salesman blush. In today's episode, we're diving into a highlight reel of Gavin's progressive amnesia, theatrical virtue signals, and the magical world where no Democrat is ever responsible for the mess they made. So buckle up. This is a guided tour through the Twilight Zone on a blue state budget.
I am just, on behalf of the taxpayers of the state, in the spirit of Ashley's question, I'm not interested. I'm just not, as a taxpayer, not just governor, I'm not interested in funding failure anymore. I'm not. I won't.
But you did it.
Time to do your job. People are dying on their watch. Dying on their watch.
It's your watch, too.
How do people get reelected?
How did you get reelected?
These encampments. They're a disgrace. They've been there years and years and years and years.
So have
you. That same rhetoric for years. People are dying. Kids are being born.
Why don't you do anything?
Overdoses. I met a young man, literally, was out there doing Project Homeless Connect, reaching out near the 405 freeway. I found out the next day he was dead.
And why didn't you do anything?
Compassion, because we had a notice. I could have helped him that night. I felt like a fraud. I felt like I let him down. We got to be more aggressive. I saw a young child, a young kid in San Diego. I was with the mayor of San Diego right before his State of the State. This poor kid was addicted to meth. He was a wonderful kid. And he said, "I'm really glad you came." He goes, "I'm struggling." And there, in the tent with his wife, was a newborn baby. He said, "Thank you for coming." There's no compassion in denying what the hell's going on in the streets and sidewalks. They need to step up. Enough of the rhetoric. I'm serious. Enough of the rhetoric. People are dying in this state. It is a disgrace. It is one of the principal reasons people are so angry. They don't trust politicians. They don't like what they see. I'm sorry to get so intense about it. It's a moral issue. They need to do their job. And if they can't do it, let me know. Just say, "We give up," and then we'll intervene. We'll come up with different strategies and different approaches. But I'm sick and tired of all the barriers and all the BS.
Was Gavin Newsom looking at himself in the mirror as he gave that speech? Because if he was, that might be the first time in years he's confronted the man most responsible for California's moral and material decay. The sheer audacity of watching a governor who has held statewide office for over a decade stand behind a podium and demand to know how politicians get reelected while people die on the streets is almost too surreal to parody. This is the man who presided over the largest homelessness surge in the nation in history, whose policies welcomed open-air drug use and actively undermined law enforcement, now screaming into a microphone about failed leadership. You'd think someone hacked his teleprompter and loaded a roast. But this isn't just about Gavin Newsom. This meltdown is a symptom of something much deeper. It's about what happens when performative morality replaces personal responsibility, when identity politics and ideological purity are treated as policy substitutes, when governing becomes theater and accountability becomes someone else's job. Newsom's rant is a masterclass in projection, an emotional outburst disguised as moral clarity, directed at faceless they, while carefully avoiding any mention of himself, because he knows that he's the one responsible. Now, here's the truth. California didn't become a humanitarian disaster by accident. It was engineered through legislation that decriminalized hard drug possession, through housing first policies that ignored treatment and accountability, through activist DAs funded by Soros-aligned PACs, and through a media culture that framed every crackdown on squalor as oppression. When San Francisco legalized dysfunction in the name of compassion, it wasn't compassionate. It was cowardice wrapped in virtue signaling. And Newsom was its poster boy. And let's not ignore the timing of all this. It's 2025. Kamala Harris just failed miserably in her presidential bid. And Trump is absolutely crushing it in the White House right now. The cultural winds have definitely shifted, and Newsom can feel it. That speech wasn't a rallying cry. It was a straight up panic attack, a desperate attempt to distance himself from the wreckage he helped create. But he's not fooling anyone. His call for aggressive intervention is rich coming from the same man who gutted efforts to enforce vagrancy laws, prioritized PR over practical reforms, and blamed conservatives every step of the way, even though Democrats had the supermajority in the legislature in the state. Notice, too, how he uses emotional anecdotes to shield himself from any sort of scrutiny. A dead addict, a baby in a tent, a young man lost to overdose. These are real tragedies, but they're not policy. They're rhetorical shields. Every time he says, I felt like a fraud, the unspoken truth is he was and is and will continue to be. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cared more about appeasing activist mobs, about CNN sound bites, about his career, than actually solving something. That's the fundamental rot of the modern left. Good intentions weaponized into moral alibis as long as the right people are crying on camera and it helps their career. We're in a cultural moment where the most ideologically possessed politicians are finally being forced to confront the fruits of their own labor. The left took our institutions, from the media to academia to nonprofits, and stripped them of their foundation and replaced it with moral narcissism. And when reality came knocking, they started crying betrayal instead of taking blame. Now, Newsom's breakdown isn't a turning point. It's just a coping mechanism. He's scared. He wants to run for president, and he sees the writing on the wall. He's been watching the narrative collapse under the weight of human suffering, and for once, there's no Fox News boogeyman to blame because nobody's buying it. But what's most revealing and frankly insulting about his absolutely theatrical performance is the sleight of hand when he says, if they can't do it, let me know, and then we'll intervene. As if he hasn't been the governor for basically a decade and was a lieutenant governor before that. As if he doesn't already have the authority, the resources, and the media spotlight to take bold, unilateral action. But he won't, because that would mean taking real responsibility. Instead, he tosses vague ultimatums to unnamed mayors and faceless they figures, setting himself up with a political escape hatch. If things don't improve, it wasn't his fault. He offered to help. And if they do improve, he'll show up for the ribbon cutting. It's the most cynical kind of leadership theater anybody could ever come up with. Do nothing, blame everyone, and position yourself as the only adult in the room just in time for the Iowa caucus. He's not solving the problem. He's just managing the optics for his presidential run. So what does this moment reveal? It shows us that progressive politics, unmoored from results and addicted to self-righteousness, cannot govern. It can fund studies, host panels, have discussions where everybody rubs each other's ego and hand out clean needles, but it cannot restore order, protect families, or offer dignity. That takes actual courage. That takes the footwork. That takes conviction and takes the humility to say, this didn't work, let's try something else. But instead, with the left, we always get theatrics. Now, my favorite part about that whole speech is how Gavin Newsom had the audacity to ask how failed politicians keep getting reelected. Maybe the better question would have been, how long will voters tolerate the illusion that failure is compassion and that words are governance? Because California, once the crown jewel of American innovation, is now a living indictment of every empty promise the modern left ever sold us.
Well, a new tax, cuts to other state services. These are things that are now being talked about here at the state capitol as some lawmakers try to continue providing health care to undocumented people at the scale that California has been. As we've been reporting, state leaders ended up spending a lot more money than they thought they would on this program. This year alone, to cover 1.6 million undocumented people, California taxpayers are spending about $11 billion.
Why?
The state next year is expecting to spend even more.
Hey, Gavin, I've got an idea. How about you stop giving people who enter the country illegally more benefits than the Californians paying for it? Radical, I know, right? But maybe, just maybe, if the state's on the brink of collapse, handing out free health care to over 1.6 million undocumented immigrants shouldn't be the hill you die on. This year, California will spend $9.5 billion with a B on healthcare for people who aren't citizens and contribute literally nothing to our economy. Next year, the number shoots past $12 billion. And now the same Democrats who engineered this mess are talking about raising taxes or slashing services for everyone else to keep it going. That's not compassion. That's theft dressed up as virtue. This isn't about hating immigrants, by the way. It's about basic sovereignty, sustainability, and sanity. California has the highest poverty rate in the country when adjusted for cost of living. Public schools are failing, infrastructure is crumbling, and crime is driving families and businesses out of the state in droves. But the political class is obsessed with optics, especially within the Democrat Party. They'd rather subsidize a parallel system for non-citizens than confront the hard truth. Their utopian policies don't scale, and they're running out of other people's money to spend. So how do we get here? It's not just bad budgeting, it's ideological rot. For years, the left has championed borderless compassion while ignoring real-world consequences. Sanctuary policies, driver's licenses, voting in local elections without having to prove that you actually live in the country or are a citizen. It's been a slow, deliberate erosion of the line between citizen and non-citizen for years. Because in the left's worldview, borders are oppressive and any restriction is framed as racism. That's why Gavin Newsom isn't just spending recklessly, he's proud of it. He calls it moral leadership. But what it really is moral laundering, using our tax money to buy moral capital while pretending the bill doesn't exist. And let's be clear, this isn't an accident. This is strategic. The goal is to redefine the role of the state, not to protect its citizens, but to serve as a global social safety net. This is Marxism in action. That's why the California supermajority is toying with new taxes, because the voters who fund this system aren't the ones they're pandering to anymore. They're betting on demographic shifts, ideological conformity, and media cover. Democrats don't have to convince the middle class because the middle class is fleeing in droves, almost 2 million in the last few years alone, and the ones who are staying are too tired, too overtaxed, and too scared to speak out. But thankfully, the facade is finally cracking. People are waking up to the fact that the modern left isn't interested in equality. They're interested in control. Redistribution without accountability, inclusion without citizenship, rights without any sort of responsibilities. And this healthcare fiasco is a clearer sign yet that California's ruling class is more committed to ideological purity than to the survival of the state. So let's be clear. The next time Gavin Newsom wags his finger about moral duty, ask yourself this. Is it moral to bankrupt your own people to virtue signal for the rest of the country so you can win an election? Is it moral to reward illegality while punishing the working families who follow the rules? Or is it just easier for a man with national ambitions to look compassionate on paper while leaving everyone else to clean up the mess? Because in the end, that's what this is. A campaign strategy disguised as policy. Newsom doesn't want to fix California. He doesn't care about our state anymore. His sights are on the presidency. He's torching California for the sake of his presidential resume. And if that means raising your taxes to fund healthcare for people who never contributed a dime into the system, so be it. You'll pay, he'll pose, and the machine rolls on until we put a stop to it.
Republican Assemblyman Carl DeMaio says the headlines you're reading are not telling the full story. He claims Newsom is acting like he's freezing or capping the free health care in an effort to save money. But DeMaio says that's not actually what's happening.
Oh, color me surprised.
Gavin Newsom this year spent $9.5 billion on free health care for illegal immigrants. Now he says he's going to cut that back. But guess what? His budget increases the cost of free healthcare for illegal immigrants to $12.1 billion. The liberal media in California is gaslighting the voters, along with Gavin Newsom, by not telling them the truth.
So I reached out to Governor Gavin Newsom's office to ask specifically about those numbers. They then pushed me off to the finance office. As I'm giving this live report, I just got an email from the finance office essentially confirming those numbers that you just heard now from Assemblyman Carl DeMaio. They said in this fiscal year, more than $10 billion was spent on health care for Medi-Cal. They expect next year to be $12.1 billion.
Gavin Newsom is a kind of politician who lights the house on fire, hands out matches to his friends, and then gives a tearful speech about how someone ought to do something. And now, right on cue, he's pretending to cut free health care for illegal immigrants while quietly jacking up the budget from $9.5 billion to $12.1 billion. That's not a cut. That's a con. And anyone with basic reading comprehension or a backbone can see it. And the worst part, he's not just lying. He's banking on the fact that most voters won't notice, that they'll skim the headlines his media allies carefully curate, never realizing that this budget cap is actually a budget boost. And when he's eventually challenged on it, he'll shrug and say, hey, I tried to cut spending, but it was out of my hands. It's classic Newsom. Manufacture the crisis, deflect the blame, then spin the fallout into a campaign talking point. And by the way, this isn't an isolated lie. It ties directly into the speech we just saw earlier. You remember the one, Newsom trembling with his moral outrage, demanding to know how politicians keep getting reelected when people are dying in the streets? The answer, Gavin, is you. You'll get reelected because the same system that hides your healthcare expansion also shields you from the consequences of your own failures. And let's be clear, this isn't just political cowardice. It's straight up institutional rot. We're looking at a governing class that actively rewards deception, moral posturing, and ideological tribalism over results. California didn't end up spending billions on non-citizen benefits because of compassion. It happened because the left built a political machine that trades taxpayer dollars for activist loyalty, bureaucracy for ballots, and slogans for outcomes. They've replaced the duties of governance with the optics of grievance. Newsom isn't expanding healthcare for illegals because it works. He's doing it because it buys him clout, because it's a signal to the donor class, the media class, and the activist class that he's still on team virtue. And when it fails, and it will, he'll say the problem was systemic, that it was underfunded, or that Republicans blocked the progress. It's the Trump slump. Never mind that he had a supermajority and still has one in the assembly. Never mind that every dollar spent on this program is a dollar not spent on public schools, on our roads, which rank 47th in the nation, and other forms of infrastructure or services for the citizens who he actually swore an oath to represent. But let's zoom out for a second, okay? Because this is bigger than California. This is the modern progressive project in a nutshell. Unlimited entitlement with no accountability. Redefine compassion as entitlement, redefine citizenship as oppression, and when the math doesn't add up, when the services collapse, the middle class completely flees the state, and the taxes soar, just blame capitalism, blame racism, blame systemic oppression or misinformation. Just rinse and repeat. Just keep doing that over and over again until people realize that you're just full of it. But the gaslighting is getting harder to sustain. It's 2025. The national mood has shifted. People are paying attention, okay? They're seeing through this doublespeak. They know that when Gavin Newsom says he's cutting costs, what he actually means is he's cutting your services to fund someone else's benefits. And when he says he's stepping in to fix the problem, what he actually means is he's stepping in to just say enough to say he tried so he can later run on it. And then he's going to step out before anything actually changes so he can, keep his nose clean for the presidential race. This is clearly not leadership. It's legacy insurance. It's opportunism wrapped in a $300 haircut. And the only way it ends is if people stop buying the lie, because Newsom isn't fooling anyone anymore. Not with a homeless crisis, not with public safety, and certainly not with a multi-billion-dollar healthcare shell game. So here's the bottom line. Newsom isn't just expanding benefits for illegals. He's expanding the lie. And if you think this ends in California, you haven't been paying attention, okay? Because the blueprint is being written right now in California, and it will be exported to the rest of the country. The only question left is whether voters still have the courage to burn this.
Check that Merced to Bakersfield line was expected to cost California taxpayers $35.3 billion. Are now warning lawmakers that cost could grow again, now up to $38.5 billion. This also means the project's budget gap could reach up to even more than $10 billion again, just for this Central Valley segment. The High-Speed Rail Authority has confirmed these new figures. Now, the possible funding gap presents even more questions about the project. That Bakersfield to Merced line was expected to be completed completed between 2030 and 2033, but the project's inspector general earlier this year warned that may no longer be the case. The High-Speed Rail Authority at some point this summer is expected to have a full update on what's going on. But in those documents that we obtained to get this information and that project leaders have confirmed, they note the cost estimate has a range depending on a variety of factors. Those factors include inflation and the rising cost of materials like concrete and copper. The High-Speed Rail Authority is eyeing possible design changes to save money potentially.
There's no greater example of Gavin Newsom's legacy than the so-called high-speed rail, a monument to fantasy budgeting, broken promises, and bureaucratic decay. What began in 2008 as a $9 billion voter-approved plan pitched to Californians as a sleek, futuristic bullet train connecting Los Angeles to San Francisco in under 3 hours has now been reduced to a glorified Amtrak route between Merced and Bakersfield that somehow still can't be finished. This project is a masterclass in political theater, sold as innovation, delivered as a $38.5 billion train to nowhere, literally nowhere. I don't know anybody who uses that little stretch or it has to go there for any reason. Running over a decade behind schedule and $10 billion over budget. And the punchline? It doesn't even go to either of the cities it was meant to connect. California's leadership doesn't build infrastructure anymore. It builds narratives. It builds headlines, press conferences, renderings, and hashtags. Newsom didn't keep this train alive because it works. He kept it alive because it polls well among donors, environmentalist lobbies, and the media class desperate to believe California still leads the way, apparently nowhere. So leading the way to what exactly? Fiscal collapse? Infrastructure that exists only in press releases? A decade-long spending spree that produces less utility than a school bus with a Tesla badge? And let's be clear, the excuses are always the same, right? Inflation, materials, unexpected costs. But they never ask the real questions. Why does California spend more per mile on infrastructure than almost any place on earth? Why is it that China can build 10,000 miles of high-speed rail in the time it takes us to lay down 100? The answer isn't copper, it's corruption, inefficiency, and the total lack of accountability. Every layer of this boondoggle has been padded with consultants, special interests, union kickbacks, and environmental reviews so bloated they could derail a lunar mission. But more than that, this train perfectly captures the left's obsession with symbolism over substance. The high-speed rail was never about transportation, it was about legacy, about proving California could be Europe. That it was post-car, post-oil, post-reality, and like almost every progressive ambition, it collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Because in a world where building things requires hard decisions like cutting red tape, standing up to activist lawsuits, and admitting when plans are unworkable, California's political class doesn't make decisions. It just makes statements. And this is what those statements cost. $38.5 billion for a train that might, just might, eventually run between two mid-sized cities that nobody really goes to in a state where teachers buy their own supplies and thousands sleep on the sidewalks. Isn't that amazing? That's not leadership. That's moral theater on taxpayer credit. Now, what this moment tells us is simple. Progressive governance can't build. It can't solve. It can only subsidize, stall, and spin. The left talks a lot about investing in the future, but what they deliver time and time again is debt, delay, and denial. The train isn't moving, but the spending never stops. And for Gavin Newsom, that's enough. Because the goal was for him to get from Sacramento to the White House. And if he has to pave the way with billions of our money and broken dreams, so be it. And I think it goes without saying that the California high-speed rail is not just a train. It's a warning sign, a billion-dollar metaphor for what happens when politics replaces planning, when ideology replaces engineering, and when image replaces impact. And unless the rest of the country learns from this, we're all passengers on the same track to absolutely nowhere. So the question isn't just how much more we'll tolerate. It's what have we already accepted without realizing it? How many broken promises have been rebranded as progress? How many billions wasted before we stop confusing ambition with competence? And at what point do we admit that the people claiming to build the future are really just managing the decline? This isn't about one train or just Newsom. It's about a system that rewards illusion over impact, theater over truth. If we keep mistaking moral posturing for leadership, then the joke isn't just on California, it's on all of us. So ask yourself, who's really driving this agenda, and why do they keep taking you in circles? And make no mistake, Gavin Newsom will try to run for president. That's been obvious for a while now. And while most people aren't paying close attention yet, the Democrats certainly are. They're quietly getting excited. They see him as their 21st century Kennedy, a polished, camera-ready figure they can rebrand and relaunch when the timing's right. Right now, though, they're not too worried about his image. But once the machine turns on, they'll do exactly what they did with Kamala. Clean up the record, manufacture the glow-up, and bulldoze anyone in the way. That's when things will truly get really dangerous, because Gavin Newsom isn't just another Democrat. He's a scummy, slimy, dishonest politician, as we saw from his lies in this video. He's charismatic on the surface, but truly rotten to the core. He's a sociopath with a smile, the Joker in real life. He will destroy this country if he gets the keys to the White House. And with the media running interference for him, who knows what kind of fantasy rail projects or budget lies he'll push next. This can't happen. Not again. Not with this guy. Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.